During a luxurious first-class flight, an audacious man decides to insult the imposing Jason Statham. But what initially seemed like a bold act quickly turns into instant regret when the shocking truth is unveiled to everyone. The midnight air sliced against Ethan's face as he sprinted down the empty street, his breath forming desperate clouds in the cold Massachusetts night. The distant wail of police sirens grew louder, pushing his legs to move faster than they'd ever moved before. In his trembling hand, he clutched a small flash drive that seemed to pulse with dark energy. "Logan, we have to split up," he gasped into his phone, ducking into a narrow alley between two brick buildings. The weight of the past 12 hours crushed against his chest. "They know about the warehouse, they know everything." "Ethan, listen to me," Logan's voice crackled with urgency. "The evidence on that drive is the only chance we have. If they get their hands on it." "They won't," he cut him off, pressing his back against the cold brick wall as blue lights flashed at the end of the street. "I promised Caroline I would finish what she started." His fingers traced the small scar above his eyebrow, a permanent reminder of the night everything changed. 3 months ago, he had been nothing more than an overworked journalist chasing dead-end stories. Now he was running for his life, carrying secrets that could bring down one of the most powerful men in the country. "The ferry leaves in 20 minutes, Logan said. "I'll create a diversion at the main terminal. Just get to Dock 7 and find someone named Mercer. He's expecting you." Ethan closed his eyes, summoning strength from somewhere deep inside. "And if I don't make it?" The silence that followed told him everything he needed to know. "I'll be there," he promised, ending the call and slipping the phone into his pocket. As he prepared to run again, a figure stepped into the mouth of the alley, silhouetted against the streetlights. "Mr. Caldwell," the man said, his voice unnervingly calm, "I believe you have something that belongs to Senator Blackwood." Ethan recognized him immediately, Ellis Thorne, the senator's head of security, the man who had orchestrated Caroline's accident. "Nothing I have belongs to him," he replied, calculating the distance to the fire escape behind him. Ellis took a measured step forward, his expensive shoes clicking against the pavement. "The senator is a reasonable man. Return what you took. Sign a simple NDA and this unpleasantness ends tonight. No charges, no consequences." A bitter laugh escaped Ethan's lips. No consequences. Like there were no consequences for Caroline. Caroline Wright made unfortunate choices. His hand shifted slightly, revealing the outline of a holster beneath his tailored jacket. "Don't make the same mistake." Time slowed as Ethan weighed his options. The ferry was his only chance to get the evidence to people who could protect it, and him. But to reach it, he would have to get past the man who had already silenced one journalist without remorse. He took a deep breath, feeling the weight of Caroline's final words echoing in his mind. Some stories cost everything to tell, but staying silent costs even more. "You're right, Ellis," he said, reaching slowly into his pocket. "Let's end this tonight." 6 months earlier, Ethan Caldwell had been curled up on his second-hand couch in his small apartment, empty takeout containers scattered across his coffee table. At 34, he had the resume of someone expecting to be running a major newspaper by now. But instead, he was stuck writing fluff pieces for a struggling local publication in Boston. His editor had just rejected his third investigative pitch that month. "Public interest journalism doesn't pay the bills, Caldwell," he'd said, barely looking up from his screen. "Readers want listicles and celebrity gossip, not corruption exposés." The knock at his door that evening had been unexpected. Even more unexpected was finding Caroline Wright, the Caroline Wright, Pulitzer-winning investigative journalist, standing in his hallway. "Ethan Caldwell?" Caroline had asked, her intense gray eyes studying Ethan's face. At 48, Caroline carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had seen the darkest corners of humanity and lived to write about them. Her silver-streaked dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and despite the late hour, she looked perfectly put together in a simple blazer and jeans. "I read your series on pharmaceutical price gouging," Caroline continued, walking past Ethan into the apartment, without waiting for an invitation. "Impressive work, especially given the resources you had." Ethan had blinked in surprise, too stunned to be offended by the invasion. That piece got killed after legal threats. How did you even see it? I make it my business to notice when powerful people try to silence good journalism. Caroline scanned the small living space, taking in the wall covered with notes and clippings, Ethan's personal investigations that would likely never see publication. And right now, I need someone like you. That night changed everything. Caroline revealed she was investigating Senator James Blackwood, a charismatic political rising star with presidential ambitions and powerful supporters. What began as a typical corruption story had evolved into something far more sinister. Evidence of blackmail, offshore accounts funneling money from suspicious sources, and connections to mysterious deaths that had been quickly ruled as accidents or suicides. I can't do this alone anymore, Caroline had admitted, something like fear flickering across her face. They know I'm onto them. I need someone they won't suspect, someone hungry enough to take risks but smart enough to stay alive. Ethan should have said no. His career was already hanging by a thread, but looking at his wall of abandoned investigations, he realized he had been waiting for exactly this moment, a chance to do the work he had always believed in. "Why me?" he asked. Caroline's expression softened briefly. "Because you remind me of myself 20 years ago, before I learned to compromise." Over the next 3 months, they built their case meticulously. Ethan officially resigned from his job to freelance, while actually spending his days following money trails and meeting Caroline's carefully cultivated sources. Logan Mercer, a former military intelligence analyst turned cybersecurity expert, joined their small team, providing technical expertise and a level head when the others became too emotionally invested. The work was exhilarating. For the first time in years, Ethan felt alive, purposeful. Caroline became more than a mentor. She became the friend and colleague Ethan had always wanted. They worked late into the night, sharing takeout and theories, building a case that would be impossible to dismiss. "When this breaks," Caroline told him one evening, eyes gleaming with conviction, "it won't just end Blackwood's career. It will expose the entire network protecting him. This is bigger than one corrupt politician." But as their investigation deepened, so did the danger. Subtle threats appeared. A break-in at Ethan's apartment where nothing was taken, a car that followed him for miles before disappearing, anonymous emails warning him to focus on stories better suited to his talents. Then came the night that Caroline didn't show up for their scheduled meeting. Ethan had waited for hours at the small cafe they used as a rendezvous point, calling repeatedly until finally driving to Caroline's house in growing panic. The police were already there, lights flashing in the quiet suburban neighborhood. Tragic accident, they said. Caroline had apparently lost control of her car on a rainy night, crashing through a guardrail into the river below. Her body had been recovered, but her laptop and phone were never found. Ethan knew immediately it wasn't an accident, but he had no proof, only a growing certainty that the same people who had silenced Caroline would come for him next. And they would have if not for the package that arrived at his apartment 2 days after the funeral, sent through a chain of couriers that made it impossible to trace. Inside was a flash drive and a handwritten note in Caroline's distinctive scrawl. "If you're reading this, they got to me first. Everything you need is here. Finish it. Trust only Logan. Some stories cost everything to tell, but staying silent costs even more." Now, facing Ellis Thorne in that dark alley, Ethan pulled his hand from his pocket. Instead of the flash drive he expected, he clutched a small canister. Before he could react, he sprayed the concentrated pepper spray directly into his face. Ellis roared in pain, his hands flying to his eyes. Ethan didn't wait. He slammed his shoulder into his chest, knocking him off balance, and sprinted past him into the street. Behind him, he heard him cursing through choked breaths, but he didn't look back. The harbor appeared ahead, the water a dark expanse dotted with lights. His lungs burned as he pushed himself toward Dock 7, checking his watch, 7 minutes until departure. The weight of everything they had discovered pressed against his conscience with each step. Offshore accounts hiding millions in suspicious transactions, evidence of blackmail against other politicians, journalists and judges who had crossed the senator's path, and the most damning of all, proof connecting Blackwood to 3 deaths that had been disguised as accidents, including Caroline's. Dock 7 came into view, a small ferry loading its final passengers. Ethan slowed to a walk, trying to appear casual as he approached. His eyes scanned the small crowd for anyone who might be Mercer. "Final boarding," called the ferry attendant. Panic squeezed his chest. He had no idea who he was looking for, and Ellis would recover quickly. Any minute now, the harbor could be swarming with Blackwood's men. "You look lost," said a quiet voice beside him. Ethan turned to find an older man with weathered skin and alert eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. He wore the simple uniform of the ferry staff, but something about his posture suggested military training. "I'm looking for a friend," he replied cautiously. "Caroline sent you," he stated, rather than asked, his voice so low he almost missed it. "I'm Mercer, Logan's father. Board now, we'll talk on the water." Relief washed over him, but before he could respond, shouts erupted from the street leading to the harbor. Ellis had recovered faster than he'd anticipated, and he wasn't alone. "Go," Mercer urged, gently pushing him toward the boarding plank. "I'll delay them." "But this isn't my first rodeo, son." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "Caroline saved my boy's life once. I'm just returning the favor." As Ethan hurried aboard, he saw Mercer approach the security team with the confident gait of someone in charge, gesturing authoritatively toward another dock. The ferry's engines rumbled to life and he moved to the stern, watching as the distance between him and the shore slowly widened. His phone vibrated. A text from Logan. "Diversion successful. Heading to rendezvous point now. Stay safe." The first time since Caroline's death, Ethan allowed himself to feel a flicker of hope. They still had a chance to finish this, to ensure Caroline's sacrifice wasn't in vain. As the ferry moved into deeper waters, leaving the lights of Boston behind, Ethan clutched the flash drive in his pocket. Whatever came next, there was no turning back now. The truth had already cost 1 life. He could only hope it wouldn't claim more before the story was finally told. 3 days later, Ethan sat in a nondescript hotel room in Portland, Maine, staring at his laptop screen. Logan paced nervously by the window, periodically checking the street below. "Are you absolutely sure about this?" he asked for the 3rd time. "Once we send it, there's no taking it back." On the screen was a comprehensive article detailing everything they had uncovered about Senator Blackwood, complete with documentation, financial records and testimony from sources who had finally agreed to go on record after learning of Caroline's death. "Caroline was sure," Ethan replied, his finger hovering over the send button. "And so am I." The past 72 hours had been a blur of sleepless nights and careful planning. After meeting with Mercer's contacts, former intelligence operatives, who had their own reasons to distrust Blackwood, they had strengthened their security measures and prepared multiple backups of the evidence. They were sending the story simultaneously to 3 trusted editors at major publications, along with the district attorney's office and several federal agencies. Most importantly, they had arranged for secure copies of all evidence to be released, automatically to hundreds of journalists worldwide, if anything happened to either of them. This time, silencing the messenger wouldn't stop the message. Logan sat beside him, placing a steady hand over his. "Caroline would be proud of you. Whatever happens after this, remember that." Ethan nodded, thinking of his mentor's final words. Some stories cost everything to tell, but staying silent costs even more. "For Caroline," he whispered, and pressed send. The immediate aftermath was more explosive than even they had anticipated. Within hours, the story was headline news across the country. Senator Blackwood's initial dismissal of the allegations as a politically motivated smear campaign quickly crumbled as more evidence emerged and additional sources came forward. Ellis Thorne was taken into custody while attempting to board a private plane to a non-extradition country. Bank accounts were frozen, search warrants executed, and former allies scattered like cockroaches exposed to sudden light. But the real revelation came 6 days later, when Senator Blackwood himself was found dead in his home office, an apparent suicide. The note beside him claimed innocence of any wrongdoing, but expressed that he could not bear the public humiliation of a trial. Ethan received the news while in protective custody. The weight of it settled uncomfortably in his chest. This wasn't justice, it was an escape. And somehow it felt hollow. He took the easy way out, Logan said, sitting across from him in the safe house kitchen, just like he always did. But at least the truth is out there now, he replied, staring into his untouched coffee. The people he hurt have that, at least. Later that night, unable to sleep, Ethan stood by the window of his secured room, watching the quiet suburban street below. He thought about Caroline, her determination, her courage, her belief that the truth always mattered, no matter the cost. He thought about the families of the others who had died for crossing Blackwood's path, who might now find some measure of peace. He thought about the young journalist he had been 6 months ago, writing listicles, and dying inside a little more each day. The sound of his phone buzzing interrupted his thoughts. It was a text from an unknown number. Caroline would be proud. When you're ready for the next story, call this number. There are more truths waiting to be told. Ethan stared at the message for a long moment. Part of him wanted to delete it, to walk away from the danger and intensity of the past 6 months. He could write a book about the Blackwood case, accept the inevitable job offers that would come his way, build a safe and respectable career. But as he gazed out at the night sky, he knew that wasn't the path he would choose. Caroline had seen something in him, a resilience, a hunger for truth that couldn't be satisfied by half measures and compromises. Some stories cost everything to tell, but Ethan Caldwell was just beginning to understand that telling those stories was the only way he could truly live. With steady fingers, he saved the number to his contacts,